to India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 95. I'm Ryan,
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
but that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
Today, we are continuing our summer series where we watch travel shows.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is especially a hot take because it just came out on Netflix.
Yes, it just came out on July 10th on Netflix. So this is about as new of a travel show as we could get to, because typically shows don't debut in the summer.
No, they don't. Yeah. Well, and everything we've watched, I mean, there's really nothing that's been super new that we've been watching.
Mm-mm.
So this is kind of fun to see
Yeah.
what's coming out in this modern day and age.
Well, I wouldn't say that all of our shows are super old
No.
and not modern, but
But Ryan, I wanted to start by reading a tweet before
Okay.
we get into this episode.
okay.
Okay, this is here's the tweet.
All right.
I would like to thank Zac Efron for changing his look to keep up with my taste. When I was 12, he was my type, and at 26, he is my type. We love consistency.
Okay.
And it's complete with a picture of him from High School Musical era, and then
Oh, I think I've seen
him
that. I think I've seen that.
where how he looks in this show.
Yes.
Yeah, and my husband showed me this one a couple weeks ago, and I was like, "Oh yeah, good point."
At this point, we should probably say that the name of the show that we're doing is called Down to Earth,
Yes.
and it features Zac Efron.
Yeah. And I can't remember the last time I saw him in something or thought of him as someone who is working in Hollywood. Maybe
Wait, you didn't see
Hairspray?
Baywatch?
Wait, what?
Baywatch? You didn't see that?
No. He
Yeah, me
mentioned
neither.
it in this.
He did,
episode that
exactly.
we
That's the only
watched.
reason I knew he was in it.
Yeah. I was like, why is he talking about Baywatch? Oh, he was in Baywatch. Okay, got it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the last thing I saw him was maybe Hairspray, but that was 10 years ago.
Oh, I don't know.
More than 10 years ago.
I don't know. I just know that I haven't seen him in very much because the types of things that he has been in have not been my type of thing. I remember High School Musical, of course, was incredibly popular when it came out. I was not the right age where it was,
Yeah.
particularly appealing to me. You and I both really like musicals. So eventually I was like, I should probably figure this out. I spend a lot of time with high schoolers, right? I teach high school. So probably just kind of see what that looks like. And I watched it and I didn't like it, Cheryl.
Yeah, that's fair.
I didn't enjoy it. I didn't particularly like it. I thought it was dumb and cheesy, but it wasn't made for me. So
Yeah.
I think that's okay. I don't
Yeah.
mind that other people do like it. I don't think it's bad. I just don't think it's particularly good.
Yeah, I think it is it's just very watered down, and I mean, it's a Disney Channel
Yep.
movie.
Yep.
So it's
That's exactly
Disney
what it
Channel
is.
making a musical, which
Yep.
is not going to be amazing.
Nope.
It wasn't awful, but it's a musical on the Disney Channel.
Yep. The point where they lost me was, and I don't remember what the song is, and I apologize to whoever our listeners are who love it and are now heartbroken or yelling at us, or at least me. But there's a part where they do some musical number while they're playing basketball.
You gotta get your head in the game.
Right. But it's all about how they aren't going to do he shouldn't be singing.
Yes.
And yet he's singing, and then the whole team is singing about how he shouldn't be singing. I'm like, that doesn't that doesn't work. Like there's a level that you suspend disbelief in musicals.
Yes.
Because most of the time people don't break out into song randomly and then have other people join in. I get that, and I don't usually have an issue with it. But it usually is capturing the emotion or the feeling that the person is feeling and around them, which I guess technically it's still doing in that case, but it just didn't fit. It didn't make sense. I don't know. That was they lost me from there.
Friend of the show, Jen, when we met in college, and she was a huge fan of it, and I had never seen it, and I watched it with her to be a good friend, and then to be even better friend, I made fun of it the whole time I watched it with her. It's exactly what you would expect with that. But and I don't even mind cheesy, but that level of cheesy was pretty rough. Yeah. So, but I didn't hate it either. I thought it was fine. Yeah. Yeah.
And I will say, from what I remember of what Zac Efron did, I feel like he did a decent job. I don't think he would, I don't feel like I'm a wonderful person to evaluate acting ability necessarily, but I don't have any ill will towards him or any of the stuff that he's done. It's just, again, not been my thing as much until now, because he did a travel show.
Well, Ryan, I'm looking at his IMDb, and you are a fan of the first thing he was ever in.
Well, he wasn't in Star Wars, so...
Apparently he was in Firefly.
What?
As young Simon?
No way, that's him? Oh, that's funny. He must have been, real young.
It was in 2002.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know exactly. There's only 13 episodes of Firefly, so it's not like it takes a lot to remember, but I know exactly the episode. I don't know the name because I'm not that good at remembering that level of detail, but I remember the episode, I'm picturing it, because it's the flashback, and he's in the parents' house, and you see the relationship between him and River, his sister. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
That's his first credit on IMDb.
So well, I approve.
So anyway, it looks like he's been working. He has multiple things per year that he's been in. It's just not things I've been watching. Right. And then he puts out a travel show. So here we are to talk about Zac Efron a little bit.
Why don't you give a little bit of background? What's the premise of this particular travel show?
So this show is he kind of does so we both watched 2 episodes. Yep. And like we always do, we would each watch one from a place that we have been. And then we chose one that we both watched from a place we haven't been. Right. And in my 2 episodes, he does a slightly different intro that kind of gets to the same premise, and then they actually go into their intro with he is going around the globe and searching for how does he put it?
It's like sustainable
stuff. Living.
Healthy, energy, food, production, stuff like that.
Yeah. And so the line from the one that we watched together, he says, "No, I'm not leaving Hollywood. I'm doing research for the secret to living a long life." So he's just looking up all sorts of things like that and discovering it in different places around the globe. I do think it's hilarious for someone who is in a very popular Disney Channel movie to have a show called Down to Earth. And it seems like it is one of those things where I really enjoyed this show and actually enjoyed him in it. And it was very hard to tell, is this how you feel, or are you doing a character? As it was because he really seemed to lean into the trying to just be your every guy, every man, and not be a super Hollywoody person. And it was believable to me, but then also I had that question in the back of my mind of is this for the show you're doing, or are you actually seeking this stuff out?
I mean, I'm not the best judge of all of those things necessarily. It seemed genuine to me. I didn't question it. And it would make sense to me that as a child actor, then growing up in Hollywood, just wanting, in a sense, to have an opportunity to do some rewrite on people's perspective on him. I would not blame him one bit for wanting to do that.
Yeah.
To say, yeah, look, I am a person. I do have feelings and perspectives like everybody else. My life may not look directly like yours, but I'm still just as human and feel just as much about life and about people. Because I think it's really easy for anybody who is popular is not quite the word that I want to use. Well-known, perhaps, because they don't have to be well-known and liked, but just people who are known by a wide group of people. It's really easy for us to turn them into a caricature of whoever they are.
Yeah.
Because we don't actually get to know them, And I think we do that with stars, Hollywood, music, those sorts of things. But I think we always also do it in our life. Just, the boss's boss's boss, who we may kind of know, but don't really directly interact with, or a teacher, or a student, or a student's parent. I'm trying to, think kind of in my world, but I think it's something that we very easily and naturally do. And so I could definitely see him wanting to show a different side of himself to the public.
Yeah. And I mean, I also think it was believable, and but it kind of had that question in the back of my mind. But I think what you said is really valid. Yeah. So there were a handful of episodes.
8, I believe. It in traditional Netflix fashion, they all came out at once.
Yeah.
So some of the streaming services are releasing, once a week as they come out, and then they're all available. This one, all of them were out the whole season all at once. I mean, the whole season. It's only 8 episodes, but so they're all available streaming on Netflix now.
So Ryan.
Yes, Cheryl.
What's the episode that you watched from a place that you've been to?
I got to watch the very first episode 1, on Iceland.
Cool.
And Cheryl, it was so fun. It was so fun. I enjoyed it so much because I love Iceland. It's super, super cool, both in temperature and also in fascination. And he went to a lot of the same places that I went to, like the actual places, the actual locations where I looked, it was like, I've been there. I remember that, or I did that thing or whatever, which was very cool. Nice. Just to be able to identify with it. So he kind of, the beginning is a little cheesy. And so in the beginning, it starts like showing because Iceland is just, it's picturesque, but in an otherworldly sort of way. It doesn't look like a lot of other places in the world, which is part of the appeal, I think. And so it starts with kind of this montage of cool landscapes and I don't remember what all, the visually very striking things. And this sort of British sounding narrator giving this thing. And I was like, I'm sitting there listening. It's like, is this supposed to be David Attenborough? Do you know who that is?
Yes.
Yeah, the guy who does a lot of the BBC documentaries. I'm like, but that's not actually him. I've seen enough of them to know that's not his voice. And I actually don't think that whoever is doing this is actually British. I think you're faking an accent right now. And it turns out, yes, it was Zac Efron basically impersonating David Attenborough.
That's amazing.
It was kind of cheesy, but okay. I mean, again, it was the first episode. I think was sort of the introduction to here's what it is. Oh, wait, but it's not going to be like this. It's going to be this other thing that's a little bit different. So that was sort of fun.
This is a different type of a travel show.
It is. It definitely had a different feel than the other ones we've watched, which I feel like we keep saying that with all these travel shows. But
but it's fun that this one's new in doing that. And so I think that's kind of perfect if he's going to impersonate someone else to start off his show. And then just be like, no, that's not what this is about.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yep. He has a co-host, Darren, and I'm probably going to say his last name wrong. Olian, I think, who is apparently a superfood expert, an author, and health guru. He wrote the book Super Life. I'm like, okay.
And
that
it
sounds
seems like he's saying that friend kind of like turned him on to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not entirely sure. Anytime I hear health buzzwords like superfood, all of my skeptometers immediately go off. And so it put me on guard pretty quickly into the episode of like, okay, but what are you actually going to say? Because like, okay, superfood, sure, but is it actually something that's valid? Because there's lots of stuff. You and I have talked about this before offline. There's a lot of stuff around there in just the health world. And a lot of it just is contradictory. And so it's a matter of what do you believe, what is actually valid, what isn't. There's a lot of different schools of thought around that stuff. So I was like, is this where we're going to go? I'm not really sure. But this one with Iceland actually makes total sense. They actually focused on sources of energy as far as like powering homes and things like that. Because Iceland apparently has 100% of its energy from renewable sources.
Really?
Yes. So that would, if you're going to do stuff on sustainability and energy production, Iceland would be a good place to go to look at what some options are in that case. And so they start at, and I'm not going to try and pronounce it because Icelandic is very difficult to pronounce, but a geothermal wellness center.
Okay.
And it's across the lake. So it's on this lake, and across the lake is the most active volcano in Iceland.
Whoa.
Apparently it erupts every 10 years or so, but I think he said that it hadn't erupted. The guy who runs the wellness center said that it hadn't actually erupted in 17 years. And then of course Zach is like, oh, so it's overdue. And which is not exactly how geoscience works, but sure, close enough. So they did a couple of things that I didn't go to that particular wellness center, but I went to another place that was similar, and they made their own rye bread. So they mixed the flour and all the ingredients all together, and then they put it in a big kind of metal pot, wrapped it with saran wrap, went over next to the lake, dug down a little bit, and there was boiling water underneath the black sand, put the pot in the boiling water under the sand and buried it up again.
I want to do that.
It's super cool. And then they had one that that basically bakes for 24 hours just in the ground. Literally, it is baked by the ground. And so they had one that they had done the day before that they then took up and opened it up, and they ate the fresh rye bread baked from the ground.
Oh my gosh, I want to do that.
It's super cool.
So fun.
And then they took some eggs and put the eggs in the boiling water, and they had some hard-boiled eggs. And so they had some ground hard-boiled eggs, not ground as in like ground up, but as in from the ground. And it really is. It's super cool. Like I said, I did that when I was there. I mean, that's not an uncommon thing because you can.
Cool.
So that was super cool to see that. And they talk about how the hot springs that is at that wellness center, they use that hot springs as the energy to heat the homes and apparently to heat the walkways, like the sidewalks, so they don't have to shovel snow in the winter, which is so smart.
That's so smart.
Yeah,
wow.
You just heat the ground and then you don't have to worry about trying to melt ice or scrape snow or anything. And then kind of like you mentioned, sort of the vibe of trying to kind of be more relatable. But I really do think it was genuine. So Zach starts talking to the crew that you almost never see when you see a show like this, right? And he's talking like directly to one of the camera guys by name, and then actually make sure that there's enough and shares with like the rest of the camera crew. And then you see some like the boom operator and the probably producer or director, some of those other people who are also there around, and they're all, eating the food and giving their kind of very brief, but they're giving their perspective as well, which is kind of fun. I like kind of breaking that, just the idea that, oh yeah, it's just, these two people and they're just there. Well, no, actually it takes quite a few people to pull off something like this. Right. So I appreciated that, and that kind of relatability that you saw. Again, was it a gimmick for the show? It could have been. It didn't feel like it to me though.
Well,
so that was kind of fun.
That's a good point. With any travel show, it's going to be very rare that it's actually hardly anyone there.
Yes.
Whatever you're seeing, there's most likely a crew on the other side of that camera.
Yep.
I'm sure there are some shows where it's really just one camera and one person, but that's not the norm. And so I think even that's why when we were talking about that Conan episode and him doing these things, it was like, yes, but there's a camera crew there. So there is a certain amount where it's like, it's very obvious that there's a weird thing happening because of this show. But I love that, of just having a moment with people and sharing in that travel experience.
Yep. That's because one of the things that I would guess, and what I've heard when you talk to actors, or not I talk to actors, but when you hear interviews with them or things, is that oftentimes, especially I'm guessing if you're traveling and going from place to place, you're spending a lot of time with this group of people. Yeah. And so you're going to get to know them. Right. And they kind of are your traveling companions. Yes, of course, there's the other kind of co-host, but if you're constantly being mic'd by this person or talking to your camera guy or, whatever, like those are all people that you're going to build relationships with over time. Yeah. So,
and like having off hours together at the hotel.
Yep.
And things like that too. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool.
Cool.
And then, let's see. At some point, and I don't remember where it was, at some point they actually do they kind of do a lot of these breakaway animations throughout the episode of explaining sort of what's going on from a more or less scientific perspective. So they do this real brief thing about Iceland and why it's so thermally active. And they talk very briefly about plate tectonics, which is cool. I'm like, yay, go science. And they don't talk about the hotspot though. That's unfortunate. It makes me sad. But they do talk about plate tectonics, which is cool because that's one of the reasons why Iceland is able to do all the things that they're able to do as far as this geothermal energy. A lot of places you go, you don't have boiling water just below the surface of black sand, right? Yeah. Like that's not a normal thing that you run into in every place on Earth. So that's kind of cool. So then they go to Sandvík, maybe. And Zac says something that I heard a number of my students when we went to Iceland say something similar. He says, the terrain is so exotic, it's easy to forget that this is Earth.
Wow.
And
I need to go to Iceland.
Oh, Cheryl, I'll go with you. I'll be your tour guide because, I will go back in a heartbeat. It was so cool. And I mean, we went in, technically, I guess it was spring. We went in April, but it snowed while we were there. Like it was cold, but it was amazing. It was so cool. And I'd even go back and do a number of the things again because it's so cool. Oh yeah. It's beautiful. It's just gorgeous.
Daryl will love it too.
Oh yeah.
And he prefers
and
cold.
Not a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, that's, yeah. I know. I'm thinking like, where will Daryl love the most? And I'm like, Iceland. We got to go like Scotland and Ireland and do some outdoorsy things there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so he goes to this next place is what they call the bridge between two continents. And I was there. And this is where they sort of talk about plate tectonics a little bit and the fact that the Eurasian plate and the North American plate meet kind of midway through Iceland. And it actually even says it on the plaque at this place, which is not 100% accurate. They try and kind of make it seem like you're actually seeing the two plates. So it's kind of like this gorge that isn't super deep, and these kind of two relatively shallow cliffs of just rocks, and then it just kind of goes down and then it's flat in between. And there's a bridge that goes across it. It's not a super long bridge. It's a walking bridge. It's not like a car bridge. And the idea is that these are the two sides of the plate, which isn't really the case. But it gets the idea, like it gets the big picture across, and it's kind of fun. And again, I was there with students, and it was kind of fun. So they go there, which I think is cool. He also said that friction releases magma, which I don't think is quite accurate. Friction is what leads to the earthquakes. But anyway, close enough. He's trying to explain it. I appreciate that he's trying to get into it. And I'm sure he didn't come up with it. I'm sure somebody gave him copy to read to explain it. But then they go to a geothermal plant where they actually produce the energy. And I was at that geothermal plant as well. Now, he got to do...
This show has a pretty big science bent. So it's not surprising that a place that you went to would have the same locations as this show.
Yes. Well, there aren't a lot of main things in Iceland. I mean, Iceland is an island. It's not a super big island. It's not particularly densely populated. And there are some sort of big things that typically you would go and you would see. Now, I don't think everybody would necessarily go to the geothermal plant. But since our trip was a science-focused trip and they're looking at sustainable energy, it does make sense. And they got to go behind the scenes and see stuff that we definitely didn't get to see while I was there.
Were you jealous?
A little bit, because I was actually kind of disappointed with the tour when we were there. It was basically, we sat and watched like a 10-minute video and then got to look through some glass to see, like, that's it. That's the turbine. And that was about it. I was like, well, I wanted you to tell me more. It's okay. So there are only 4 geothermal plants in Iceland. They have 64 boreholes at this particular place that go 1 mile into the ground. And they had a really fun, a really good graphic that I really appreciated that he showed. It's about 4.25 Empire State Buildings down, to give you an idea of how far down that is.
Wow.
Yeah. And apparently, Zac's dad works at a nuclear power plant. So he was actually somewhat familiar with some of the concepts of energy generation, which I thought was kind of cool. And he asks a really good question. He says, he talks about the nuclear, and he says, any type of power generation that you do, there's always some sort of downside. No matter what you're doing. With nuclear, obviously, it's the nuclear waste. With coal, it's the carbon dioxide. There's always some sort of negative sort of downside. What is it with the thermal? And so then they spend a little bit of time and talk about how it still does emit carbon dioxide and some hydrogen sulfide, but only about 3% when compared to fossil fuel sources. So significantly less, but it still does. And then they drive out to one of the newest kind of boreholes where they're getting all of the steam that's literally just coming out of the ground naturally. Like that's all over Iceland. There are spots that just have steam coming out of the ground. Wow. It just does. That's just Iceland. And so they've got one of these spots, and the steam is coming out so fast, and there's so much, they have to put in earplugs because of how loud it is.
Whoa.
Yep. And they describe how they can feel the ground underneath them shaking, like vibrating, not like major shaking, but they can feel the vibrations in the ground just from the steam just kind of coming out, which is kind of cool. And then apparently what this place does is they take those gases and reinsert them back into the rock. So they bore these other holes and then do this complicated process that puts the carbon dioxide and the hydrogen sulfide back into the rocks. So they're trying to not actually release it into the atmosphere at all.
Whoa. That's
which I think is also cool. Yeah. So that one's cool. Then they go and they go back to whatever the hotel is that they're staying at, and they do a fire and ice massage.
Ooh.
So apparently the first part is they do think of like a little jacuzzi or like a hot tub sort of a thing. So there's one that's really cold and then one that's really hot. And apparently you go in the really cold one first, and then you go in the one that's really hot.
This just reminds me of the Secret Garden movie.
Secret Garden movie?
Do you know the book, The Secret Garden?
Yeah.
Do you know the movie?
There's multiple movies. I feel like I've seen a couple different versions.
There was one I saw as a kid a couple times, and that boy, Colin, one of the things they did to try to like help his body heal was dipping him in ice baths and then really hot baths. And then went back
interesting.
And forth. And it reminds me. I just have that visual.
I don't remember that at all.
You know, like visuals from movies you've seen as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, similar idea. Then they go inside and they get stones. Think of like maybe ones that you might use to like super smooth ones to like skip rocks or something on a lake, right? And so some of them that are ice cold and some of them that are, I don't know how hot, but very hot, right? And so they kind of alternate those, rubbing them on like your back and
I've
your
heard
shoulders.
Of hot stone massage.
Yeah. And
but
that
I haven't
sort
heard
of thing.
It with the cold too. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So they kind of alternate that. And they talked a little bit about, opening up blood vessels and constricting blood vessels. I'm like, okay, yeah, it'll do that. I don't know why that matters, but okay. So they do that. Then they go to the Om Nom chocolate shop.
Ooh, what?
Uh-huh. The Om Nom chocolate shop. And they get to make their own custom chocolate bars.
Heck yeah.
And apparently they try a bunch of different things. Apparently there's one type of bar that they do where they use coffee beans instead of cocoa beans.
Okay.
To make the bar, I guess.
Ooh, that's
I don't know if
interesting.
Can that even be counted as chocolate then? I don't know. But apparently they do whatever that is. And so then they've got all these different materials that they can put in their bars. Really, it's just, they just poured the chocolate into a mold and they can just like put stuff on it.
But that's so fun.
Yeah. And Zac is like, I'm just going to do everything. I'm putting it all in there. And he like puts a little bit of everything in his bars.
That's me.
Yep. And then they get to taste them at the end. They buy a couple, bars or whatever, and they get to taste them. And Zac's is terrible. It tastes awful. And he's the one who says that. So it's like, funny. Well, okay, maybe shouldn't put everything in then. Note to self, Cheryl.
Fine.
And as they're walking out, and this is sort of, your health guru person, Zac's like, I'm so stoked that chocolate is a superfood. Like, hey, works for me. And then they go to Gullfoss, which is one of the most well-known waterfalls in Iceland. And there's so many amazing waterfalls in Iceland. Like, it's gorgeous. This is one of them. I think Foss is Iceland for falls, like waterfall. And I think the gull, means gold. I think that they're the Golden Falls, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And apparently 1.3 million people visit it every year.
That sounds like a big number, but I don't know how many people visit any other well-known place.
But it's Iceland.
Okay.
Like
fair.
there aren't 1.3 million people in Iceland.
Yeah. So it's a very popular tourist attraction.
It is a very popular tourist attraction. Yes. And they go through this whole thing where they meet this sort of ranger guy, and then kind of the way that it's cut together and then the voiceover, they kind of make fun of him because they ask him questions and he doesn't know any of the answers. But I get a little annoyed because he's asking questions of things that, like, they're just random number facts. Like, well, how many waterfalls are there? How many gallons, go through this waterfall? I'm like, those are very specific facts that I wouldn't necessarily, if someone does know that and they share that, it's like, great, but I wouldn't expect them to know it. And then they do come around and eventually come to this thing of like, oh, well, he's only been doing it for like a week or something like that. I don't remember. He hasn't been doing it for very long. So then they're like, oh, I guess we'll give him a pass. Like, yeah, but then you didn't need to put that in at all. But that's just me. And then they do this whole thing about how water produces negative ions, which are good for health and stuff. And I'm like, okay. So I just kind of gloss over that a little bit because it's a little more complicated. And then they go to a power station that's a hydro power station. So it's on a river.
Okay.
And that's the oldest power station on a river. It's one of 15 hydropower stations, and the hydropower actually apparently produces 75% of Iceland's electricity is from hydropower. So the geothermal is the other 25%.
Wow.
Yeah. And it looks like they have kind of a cool sort of museum-y sort of thing there. We've talked about museums before and how I think the more it tells a story and interacts with you, I think the better it is. And it looked pretty interactive about how force can generate power. So there's all these different things that you can do and you can touch and you can try it. And like, you know, they have this metal thing that you can move up and down, and then it'll get a light bulb to light up. Right. So like as you are applying force, you can see how it leads to electricity. And this big, huge wall. And if you push on it, it lights up. It looks like LED or digital, and it like lights up based on how hard you push. So the harder you push into it, the more it lights up to show the more energy that you're generating. And so that's kind of cool. And then they get to go 15 stories down underground to see the top of the turbines. And apparently it then goes down below that, which is cool. And again, they get to go to places that I don't think everybody gets to go. And it just goes into a cave. They like open this door and all of a sudden they're in a cave underground, which is super cool.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. And then Cheryl, what you'll like is they go to Dill, which is a restaurant for dinner. And it's a Michelin star restaurant.
Ooh.
I didn't know they had that. And Darren is apparently vegan, so they do some vegan stuff.
Okay.
And I apologize, you're going to be really disappointed in the way that I describe the food. The first thing that they have is a plate of leaves. And when I say a plate of leaves, I literally mean a plate of leaves. It looks like if you were to go outside in the fall and pick up some random leaves and put them on a plate and maybe get some twigs, that's kind of what it looked like. And then you find out that it's from the chef's backyard. So that's actually what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. And I couldn't tell if you were supposed to eat the leaves or not, because they had these two little prongy things sticking up that had stuff on it. And Darren did eat one of the leaves, but I wasn't sure if it was really that the leaves were just supposed to be for decoration or if it was supposed to be a salad. It was very unclear to me. I would not have eaten it personally, but I'm sure you would have tried it if you thought that you were supposed to. Yeah. But then they got to have dung smoked bacon wrapped lamb.
Dung smoked?
Dung smoked. Yep. Dung as in feces.
Why?
Because in Iceland, they have almost no trees. So if you're going to burn something, you're not burning much wood because you don't have much wood.
Oh.
So they traditionally would light feces on fire and it burns pretty well.
Okay.
So, yep, dung smoked. And then they had some, well, Zach did because Darren's a vegan, but some reindeer tartare.
Oh, that'd be fun.
And then a rutabaga sorbet, which apparently they thought was phenomenal and really, really good.
That'd be fun to try.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, and then they had one final stop.
Okay.
And it's kind of your quintessential Iceland tourist location, which is the Blue Lagoon.
Oh, I've probably seen photos.
Yep.
Of this. Okay.
You probably have. Yep. So it's the Blue Lagoon, which is sort of they've turned it into this kind of spa area. And so there's another geothermal power plant nearby. And I think the term is effuse. After they use the water to heat up. So they use the water from the ground to heat up other water that they have to turn into steam to then turn a turbine. Because they don't just use the steam or the hot water itself from the ground because it has all these other minerals in it and it'll like gum up the turbine and they'd have to do all this cleaning and stuff. So they use other water that they can just reuse over and over again, but they use the hot water from the ground to heat the other water. I know it sounds a little convoluted, but it makes sense. But then once they've done that, the water is cooled down some, but it still has to go somewhere. And so it just kind of goes out onto the landscape, which is incredibly black, volcanic, craggy rock. And it started to just kind of collect in these pools. And there's enough silicate in the water that it started to coat the kind of edge of these pools in this kind of whitish, bluish kind of film that kind of makes the rocks less craggy, right? And so they're not going to cut up your feet. And it just made these pools, and then they ended up turning it into a spa. Cool. And so you can go and do all these spa treatments and things. You can just go in the water. We went there. It was actually very relaxing and a lot of fun. I don't know. I think it's like $100 to go in. So I can't decide if I think, no, it's not. I don't know if it is actually worth it or not, but since it was already included in what we did, it was great.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
And so
they
go
have to make the decision in the moment if you're going to pay admission. Yeah,
exactly. And at this point, they talked about how Iceland has 7 times more tourists than they do locals.
Wow.
Yep. And apparently in the 70s, Iceland was completely dependent on imported coal and other fossil fuels. So since the 1970s until now, they have fully transitioned to entirely renewable resources.
Wow.
For their energy.
That's not that long ago.
It isn't. And that's, I think, kind of the point that they're trying to make, right? Is like Iceland has really made that choice to move to renewable energy. Now, to be fair, one thing that they don't really talk about is Iceland is in a very unique place on Earth because of the boundary of the tectonic plates, and then also the hotspot. They have access to that geothermal stuff, and they don't have a huge population. They don't have a lot of wildlife. There is some, but there's not a lot. It's, again, very sparse. Whereas, if you do a dam to do hydroelectric power, a big thing, especially here in like Washington State and other places, is what does that do to the fish that are spawning and, things like that. So there are other considerations. It's not cut and dried, simple, oh, we should just immediately do it. But I do think it does show that, hey, when you're determined, you can start making some very different choices.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. And that was the episode.
So, Ryan.
Yes, Cheryl.
Do you feel that this show matches your experience of this location?
Yes, absolutely. It was, because again, like I said, a lot of the places that I went or that they went were places that I went, or things that they did were also things that I did and saw. And I do feel like they did a good job of kind of capturing a lot of the beauty of Iceland and the science, which is a big part of what my experience was, which I don't know that you get as much of that part in other travel shows. Yeah. Like I've seen the Rick Steves episode on Iceland, which is great, but it doesn't go into the science to the level that this one did. So in a very unique way, yes, I think it did match my experience.
Wow.
More so than I would have guessed.
If I thought about us doing this travel series and thought, oh, Zac Efron is doing a travel show, and Ryan will say that matches his experience more than Rick Steves, I don't think I would have guessed that one necessarily.
Yeah. Cheryl,
yes.
I think it's your turn. Which episode did you watch?
So I watched the episode about London.
Ooh, London.
Yes, which you and I have London. Both been to.
Yes.
I've been there twice, one time in middle school and one time in college. And I would love to go again. I definitely would like to go back there sometime. So I was excited to see someone in London in present day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it included a couple of touristy things, and then it was mainly about sustainability, and so it didn't necessarily include the top 10 of what you would visit if a tourist went to London.
Sure.
But it was really cool. So the opening scene was a bunch of people picking up trash. So that was kind of interesting.
Off the street?
Well, you couldn't quite tell where they were. But
okay.
But yeah, and so it was like, I wonder where we're going with this. And then his intro talks about how this city overcame lethal levels of pollution. And so that's why he chose London for this show. And so then we start in New York at the start of the episode.
Oh, interesting.
And they talk with a beekeeper who's in New York City on top of a building. Okay. And they talk about bees. And I know a lot I probably know a lot more about bees than your average person because my brother-in-law is a beekeeper.
Right.
So I hear bee talk, and it's fascinating. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so it's fun. Kind of. I don't know everything about it, but like I hear bits and pieces, about bees. But yeah, so it's interesting because I talked about like this beekeeper was sharing why he thinks that bees are endangered and how important bees are.
Right.
And he talks about that bees. He thinks that bees in the city get more variety of crops that they're pollinating, and so I think I forget if he was saying it had to do with the health of the bees, that was a benefit, but there was some benefit he was saying to bees being in a city area.
Interesting.
And so and then they go to London, and then later in the episode they talk to a beekeeper in London. So I think that's how they tie it around. So I don't know why it was kind of, to me it felt like an odd choice to do an episode about London and talk to a beekeeper in New York at the start of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were trying to give us context because it didn't seem like it was super important necessarily, but maybe they got a cool opportunity or something.
So it really was just the beginning and the end were bees, and the middle part that was about London really had nothing to do with bees?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was kind of interesting. I wrote down a quote when he's with the beekeeper in New York. He said, well, you're used to being flogged by thousands of women. And then him as a narrator, he was like, this is a little beekeeper joke because they're all female bees. So.
Got it.
Yeah. They did include an interesting thing that they said that pollution doesn't have much effect on the bees' honey. So that was also interesting. I guess they were trying to tie in the pollution piece of it.
Okay.
As well. Really quickly before they hopped on their flight to London, they went to a Top Golf in New York. We got like a 5-second clip. He was like, and then we hopped off to London. It's like there's a couple different styles, I think. I've never been to one. It's like a golfing range, but it's kind of like golf range meets bowling alley where you can like order drinks, and it's like some of them they actually have the land to do it for real. Some of them it's like a simulated driving course.
Oh, like a driving range.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But it's like a fancy one. Apparently they're fun. But anyway,
and they just were there.
They were there really quickly, so it was kind of funny. They were like, "Oh, first we went golfing, and then we went off to London." So it was kind of an interesting cut. I don't know if they wanted to show a tourist attraction in New York.
In New York?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of. So this was my intro to the show. So I like this show a lot, but this was a very odd intro to the London episode.
Well, and if I remember right, the episode titles are just the name of the city.
Yes.
And yours is called London, not New York and London.
Yes. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Anyway, that's how the London episode started. So they meet with the director of cities for the London School of Economics, and they talk about air pollution, and they meet with him in the London Eye. So that was kind of cute. So they even made a joke that it was his office. And so for people who don't know, the London Eye is a really large Ferris wheel that's right on the river in London, and has a great view of Big Ben, and so it was just kind of cute that they like tied in the tourist attraction to the conversation about air pollution with this guy. And so they talked about how air pollution is still present and kind of deaths associated with it. So what they're doing about it these days with limiting the number of vehicles in the heart of the city. There's they call it congestion charging, where there's a pay per day to enter a certain area of the city by car.
Okay.
And so they're reducing the number of cars that are going in the city daily as a way to handle that. Then they go to the London School of Economics itself, and we get to see a green wall, which was just recently one of my Wish You Were Here's in Madrid.
Right.
Was a green, they called it a green wall. I've also heard it called a living wall. I forget which I even called it in my Wish You Were Here. But so they talk about this wall, that it has 6,400 total plants on it. It's like the side of a building, and that it helps the building because it absorbs less heat, so it's kind of a natural insulation as opposed to concrete. And then they talk to a beekeeper at that school, and he talks a little bit more about bees. So
At the
they had more
School
bee
of
talk.
Economics?
Yeah, but I don't know, maybe if they just have different type of studies they're doing on sustainability there or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think those were both related to sustainability. So yeah, they had some bee talk, and then they do a tourist attraction. They go to the ArcelorMittal orbit, I think it's called. It was a lot of letters. It is the tallest sculpture in the UK. It was commissioned for the Summer Olympics. And then afterwards, they added the tallest, longest tube slide in the world.
What?
So now you can go slide down the longest tube slide in the world on this sculpture.
Okay.
And they had to like wear a helmet and get all ready and stuff. It looked really fun. I would do it. Looked great.
But it's not like a water slide.
No. It's like a McDonald's slide. But the tallest and longest one in the world.
Wow.
Yeah. And the sculpture was really cool looking. And it was just hilarious.
Oh.
Are you seeing it?
Yeah. That looks really weird.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
I think it's hilarious that afterwards they added this slide. I think that's amazing.
I mean, it's clever.
To be like, well, okay, we paid for this thing for the Olympics. Let's get some.
Oh, that's
admission
where
from
the Olympic.
tube
You
slide.
probably said this and it just didn't register. That's where the Olympic torch was. The Olympic flame.
Oh.
Oh, maybe you didn't say that.
I
At
did
least
not
looking
say
at the
that.
pictures, that's what it looks like. Like
Okay.
I think maybe that was up top. So that's why it's kind of a sculpture-y thing.
Mm.
Maybe.
And
I
now
could be
it's a
wrong.
tube slide.
I could be wrong, but that's what it kind of looks like to me. That maybe that's what it was. Interesting.
Yeah. So that was a little side thing where it was just for fun that they did that. And then they assembled their own living wall. And I'm so interested in the editing of this episode because I don't know why they didn't do that right after visiting the living wall.
Yeah.
But they made their own one and it was smaller. But it was like, it felt very much like for anyone who wants to do this at home, here's where they like assembled these pieces, these little troughs all in a row on the wall. And then they put the plants in and got to decorate their own. So it looked really good. It was very cool. Because all you see is the plants. You don't see the troughs because they're angled. So all you see sticking out is these plants.
But that's different than hydroponics, right? Because did they use soil?
No. And they were already in little containers. They just put them in there. So I'm not sure if there was soil in the little individual pots that they were in or not.
Okay.
But yeah, it was really cool. Then they went to the River Thames and talked about how it's one of the cleanest rivers. And they talked about an organization called Thames 21, and they host river cleanups. And so that was our opening shot, was the picking up the garbage. And so they host groups. I couldn't tell if it was totally volunteers or how they do it, but they do a lot of river cleanups to keep it really nice.
Oh, cool.
And then, is it Darren, his co-host? Super short and sweet. They showed him driving around on a bamboo bike. And they called it a form of ecotourism, which is, I think, a little different than how I've heard ecotourism reference. But maybe that was a joke they were doing. And it was something that he rented from his hotel. And it was this bike that had a lot of bamboo pieces to it. And they talked about how you can ride a bike instead of driving.
Okay.
Yep. And then the rest of the episode was food.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Cheryl.
Yeah, so that was pretty exciting. There was a fair amount of food in this. So they met with this woman who opened her own restaurant. She's a local food blogger and then started this restaurant and has a cookbook. It's called Deliciously Ella. And She became vegan because she was really sick and realized like the only way to regulate her symptoms was with food and to make herself better. Like medications weren't working, and so she talks about how that all started and how going vegan has really helped her in her symptoms, and then they do like a little cooking class with her. She kind of gives them a cooking class.
Oh, cool.
With for a vegan dish that she likes to make. And then they went to a restaurant owned by Simon Rogan, who has 2 Michelin star restaurants. But they went to this restaurant that is his development kitchen, which I have heard as a tip is to try to find restaurants that are owned by the Michelin people, but not the Michelin ones themselves, because oftentimes they use those as kitchens to like try new things, and that sounds really fun, and I think I would like to do that. I just need to do research then before visiting places. And so this is a farm to table restaurant, and it's his own farm that things are from, and it's an all plant-based dining experience, and there were just about 1 million really beautiful shots of dishes. And so I didn't write them all down just because.
Now, when you say dishes, you don't mean plates. You mean food.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Everything looked amazing. And they were describing all these foods. And I was like, I just want to eat and cook all of that right now. And that was the episode.
Okay. It sounds kind of disjointed.
Yeah, it really was.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, was this the last episode of this series?
I think it might have been. Let me check here real quick. That's not the one I want. No, that's episode 7. There's one more after that. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt pretty random.
Interesting. Okay. Do you feel like this matches your experience of London?
No. It really doesn't. I mean, I've pretty much only seen touristy things in London and stayed in like a college dorm there. So did like the college kid thing there when I was staying with our friend Jen. And learned nothing about the pollution or just, anything sustainability related. And also, it was before the Olympics, so that sculpture wasn't there. And I've seen the London Eye, but I have not been on it. So, yeah, it didn't really match it, but it was an interesting episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things about this show is kind of like we've talked about with a few other shows that we've watched. It's not primarily a travel show.
Yes.
Right. It's a show about sustainability, and they go to other places around the world. They travel in order to try and tell those stories.
Yes.
But it's not specifically a travel show. At least that's been my impression so far.
Yeah, I think, I'd agree with that. I think travel is the method that they tell their story.
Right. Well, kind of like some of the Gordon Ramsay, right? Or the Anthony Bourdain, those, I would not call those travel shows. I would call them food shows. But that doesn't mean that travel doesn't feature heavily in the show.
Well, and the show would not be what it is without travel.
Correct. And I think that applies to this show as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's a similar description. It's not this is how you visit London. And these are the things you should do when you visit London. It's this, and I mean, with this idea of they figured something out in this location, so let's go check that out.
Let's learn from them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you can pick some things out of it. For example, you talked about that organization that does cleanup. I know that there is a growing number of people that when they travel, they like to look for those service sorts of opportunities in places that they go. And so it's something where potentially if you're going to London and you're looking for something that can make a difference, you might be able to volunteer with some cleanup for an hour, on the Thames or something like that. So, but that's not its purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got one more episode. This is the one that you and I both watched, and it's a place that neither you nor I have been to.
Or knew where it was.
Or knew where it was. Yes, I will confess. Well, we had a vague idea where it was.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I think I knew it was in the Mediterranean somewhere.
That was more than I knew. I might have
Okay.
been able to guess by the name, but I didn't. I hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah. So it's the island of Sardinia.
Which sounds made up a little bit.
Sure. And what's the big deal about this island? Why did they pick there? So far we've had London was about reducing pollution. Iceland was alternate forms of energy. What's the big deal about Sardinia?
Longevity. There are a number of people who live here who have lived to be over 100.
Yes. And they use the term centenarian a lot for
Yeah.
that, people who are 100 or older.
Yeah, which I was able to catch on quickly what it meant, and then I thought that's such a fun term. I liked it.
Centenarian.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it also sounds a lot like veterinarian, but that's okay.
Sure. Sure.
A doctor for people who are over 100 years old, maybe.
I mean, I'm guessing if you're over 100 years old, you probably need a doctor, because I'm not even half of 100 years old and I still need a doctor. So I can only imagine.
So they meet some men who are studying the lifestyles associated with long life. And
Yes.
can you explain the blue zone?
Yeah, which was interesting. So it sounds like these are two scientists, I think. I couldn't quite tell exactly what it was that they were directly researching. So they might be social scientists, or I'm not entirely sure, because it sounds like they did a lot of their work by interviewing people, which is more of a social science than it is necessarily like a biology, chemistry, physics type of a thing. But one of the ones who'd been on that island for a long time was keeping track of places where people were 100 years old or older. And he had a map, because this was, I don't know, 30 years ago, something like that. Does that sound right? I don't remember how long ago it was.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he had a paper map, and he decided he wanted to kind of mark anytime he found someone that was in that kind of age bracket on the map, so he could see if there was a concentration of them. And the only thing that he had was a blue marker. And so he just started marking on the map places where he found people that were 100 or more with this blue marker. And so when they went to go publish their first paper, he just called it the blue zone, because it was the zone where there was more blue markings.
That was the best reason for a term ever. I love that.
And apparently there's
great.
other blue zones throughout the world as well. They now use that term. At least that's the impression I got from the show. But this is kind of where it started, which is interesting.
So this episode, I really like this episode. It's so chill.
Thought you might.
It felt like I was there and like visiting with these people and eating this food and cooking, and it's very leisurely, and they're talking to these older people and just learning about their lives and what they think the secret to their longevity is. So we see this old woman who they give a test to kind of see like her mental sharpness.
Yeah.
And
I think she's only 97.
Yes.
Is that right?
I think so, yeah. And she aced the test. She did really well.
Yep.
And so, and then they talk about that they trace the lineage of a lot of people here, and that 77% of the people can trace their ancestry back to 5 people.
A group of 5 people.
From several hundred years ago?
I think it was about 500 years ago is what I'm remembering. Yeah. So and that's one of the things I appreciated about the episode, because they kind of weave their way through the sort of the conclusion, I guess, of like, well, what makes these people old? And they don't ever, I don't think, really tie it up nicely, because
it's
the
very poetic the way they do it.
But the very beginning, they talk about it as if it's all about the food that they eat and how
Mm-hmm.
really you're supposed to eat no protein at all. And Zac he says multiple times, this goes against everything any trainer I've ever had has ever told me, and
Mm-hmm.
all of these things and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, there may be something to that, but I kept feeling like, yeah, but it's more complicated than that. It's not
Yeah.
just what you eat. And so then when they talk about the genetics, and then they also
Yeah.
later about the lifestyle, they meet a
Mm-hmm.
man in another city who goes I think he was 97, and he goes walking 3 times a day, a quarter of a mile, like walk 3 times
Up
a day.
hills and steps
Oh yeah.
and
And he just
yeah.
does all the time, so it's not just this one thing. The genetics is a component. The food that you eat and how you eat is a component. How active you are is a component.
Yeah.
There are a lot of these things. And they also talked a lot about stress. Did you catch that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of resonates, I think, a little bit with what you were talking about, how you felt like you were there, because it wasn't, even in the way that they told this episode, it wasn't this, and now we're here, and now we're here, and now we're doing this, and now we're doing this, and, back and forth. It was much more of this spending time with people.
Yes.
And getting to know these people and talking to these people,
Mm-hmm.
and this just reduced stress that, not all stress is bad, of course, but I think most people in the United States would agree that the general level of stress that we tend to experience on a semi-regular basis is probably not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it was Zac Efron's Eat, Pray, Love episode. It really was.
I've never seen Eat, Pray, Love, so
I know you haven't
don't
seen it, but
know what that means. But
even if you have a sense of what that movie might be like, about she goes on this journey, she goes to Italy and she eats, and then she goes to India and she prays, and then I forget where she goes and has love, but she's on a journey. He's on a journey, because he, as the narrator, is like, so maybe the secret is this, and maybe he's kind of wondering throughout the episode. So they do a bread making class, and they do pasta making, and they make dessert, and I wanted to be there so bad.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
And they spent a fair amount of time on this.
They did. And I appreciate, this is, again, some of that, was it staged or was it not? And I don't think it was, but Zac isn't very good at it.
Yeah.
He's trying to make the pasta, and the woman who's kind of teaching them, she's like, no. And they keeps telling him that he keeps doing it wrong. Whereas Darren, of course, keeps doing it just right, and he's got it all right. But I appreciated that, because, you love the cooking class because you love cooking. I think I would find the process interesting, but I'd be frustrated because I'd probably be doing it wrong all the time. So I was identifying with that component of he wasn't doing it right. Hey, that'd be me. I wouldn't be doing it right either. I'd be screwing it up and frustrated. So even that.
There's a great line where he says, I can tell in any language if I'm messing something up.
Yeah.
Something like that. It was so cute. Yeah. We get a little brief moment where he sees the younger generation. His fans have found out that he's there. He takes a picture with them, and it's sweet. Yeah. And then we get the old man in his series of hills and steps. He goes to a bar and has some wine. They're asking him about his old age. He's sharing a lot of things. He talks about just general happiness and positivity. And then eventually he points it to the wine he has, which was really cute. It's a tiny little glass of wine. They have minestrone together. That looked amazing. And just kind of a long conversation, again, about all these aspects of longevity.
And very reflective, sort of a introspective conversation about, where's my life? How does it fit in? And at one point, Zac says, and I think this is actually an earlier point, but he does say, I'm so happy that I'm eating carbs again.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I appreciated, because I do think we have this idea that carbs are bad when really they're not. Our bodies do need carbs. Now, that being said, we do have too many of them in our general diet here in the United States. So carbs aren't bad, but we tend to do most things to an extreme.
Yes. Well, and that's one thing he talks about is I can't have carbs. And then they talk about moderation. Yeah. And I think moderation is a big piece of a lot of things too. There's a big sense of community in this episode as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then we end with shepherding, right?
Yeah, which felt so random and apparently is a callback to an earlier episode that we haven't seen.
Oh.
Because he goes to milk this, is it a goat or is it a sheep?
I thought it was a sheep.
It could have been because I don't know. Well, because they talked about both goats and sheep, I think, didn't they?
Yes.
Right. And so I think you're right. I think it was a sheep, but apparently in a previous episode, he had to milk something. So he wanted to go ahead and milk this sheep and did, but like, that was it. It felt kind of random and anticlimactic to me.
Yeah.
But again, we didn't watch all the episodes, so maybe it would be more meaningful if we had seen the other episodes.
But then even they're talking about walking around and how much shepherds walk, and that's an element of it too.
Yep.
But they also, and I've heard this point before, that it would be different than walking that much or running that much on a treadmill, that this is on the actual ground doing work. And even that old man was talking about not so much just getting this activity in, but doing things the way they used to be done, or like doing work when in like physical work or different things like that.
Yeah.
And
that's something that I was thinking about as watching this too, because I like to walk. Like, I enjoy walking, but I want to have a purpose. Like, I don't want to walk to walk. Right. So like, I'll go and walk with someone and have a conversation with the person while we're walking, or I'll walk to somewhere. Right. So if I walked to church on Sunday instead of driving because the weather was nice. It's a 20-minute walk. It was great. I walked there and then I walked back. Right. Like, it was great. Like, I enjoyed that, but there was a purpose. Right. I was going to a thing. Whereas if I'm going to walk just because I know it's, healthy and I'm getting out and do it, like, I'm immediately bored. Because there's no purpose. So I like, kind of, again, what they're saying within context. If you're doing work, if it's something that's a part of every day, then it's not that you're just deciding to exercise. You just have a part of your life where that activity level is necessary.
Yeah. Which I have heard about, like, if you have a desk job, even if you do get the right amount of exercise in, it's still not the same. As just having activity, which for you and I I have more of a desk job than you do. For the last couple of months, you've had
right now I've had more of a desk job than I've ever had. It's been a huge adjustment because I typically will stand and walk. I mean, not walk like huge distances, but be moving for at least 5 hours of my day.
And this job I have right now, which I've had for a year and a half, is my first like 100% desk job, and it is taking a toll on me. So I felt a little challenged by this episode. Yeah. So Ryan.
Yes, Cheryl.
Based on the title of our show, Take Me With You, if you could take yourself to one thing in this episode, what would it be and why?
I mean, on one level, I don't know that there is like a thing. They like, kind of like you described, they mostly just sort of hung out and talked to people. So, I mean, the only actual thing that it seems like they did really was the cooking class.
Okay, how about this? If you could take yourself to one scene in this episode, what would it be and why?
I mean, I think I'm going to come to the same conclusion because otherwise they're just sitting around and chatting.
Well, yeah, but did you want to be a part of one of those conversations?
No, not really.
Did you want to ask the social scientists about their credentials?
No, not really. So I think, actually, I think it would be the cooking class because I think that would be the most interesting because you're going to get to have some conversation, but you're doing something. And if it's strangers, I would rather have a task than just let's sit down and talk. What about you?
Oh, the cooking class. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Even if there were other things happening in this episode more. I mean, I also do want to go to that bar with that old man because that was all very adorable.
Yeah.
And I want the espresso and the wine. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But that cooking class looked delightful. I want to make those things.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did this episode make you want to go to Sardinia more than before watching the episode, Cheryl?
1,000%. Because I didn't know it existed. But I mean, you tell me about an island in Italy, and obviously I'm going to be on board.
Sure.
So, but yeah, it looked wonderful.
Yeah. I think I would agree with that. I definitely want to go more. It would be a different sort of a destination.
Yeah.
This would be a destination to go and rest and relax, as opposed to a destination to go, do, and see.
Yeah. But seeing a bunch of active old people just enjoying their lives is pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you, Cheryl, want to travel with Zac Efron?
Oh yeah, totally. He seemed like a great travel companion. He didn't seem entitled at all. And like we were talking about
I would agree with
this
that.
episode, I don't think he was putting on airs. I think
I don't think so.
He really approached travel with humility.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I love about this show a lot is we've talked about that a lot on our podcast about approaching travel with humility.
Which is hard to do.
Learning things from the places you visit, from the people who live there, from other lifestyles, from other cultures.
Yep.
And that was the purpose of this show was there are some things we don't have figured out here in the States or for him in Hollywood. So let's go somewhere else where they've learned something and learn from them. And especially in this one, I think he felt, I mean, even he said that he doesn't think he would live as long living in Hollywood. Yeah. And so that was really interesting that I think he was learning a lot from that. And so, but even him I mean, there's these learning things he's doing for the show, and then he's peppering in these tourist experiences. Yeah. And so if that's how he travels, or I don't know, he seemed like a great travel buddy. Yeah. How about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. He seemed really, easygoing and down to earth. See what I did there?
Yeah.
Yep. Nice. No, but I think you're right. He's looking, at least in the show. And again, how much of that is him and how much of that is, producers or whatever. But I get the impression that it is genuine, a desire from him, that I think he's looking for similar things from travel that I'm looking for and that you're looking for from travel, right? Like you said, learning and experiencing and getting to know kind of what the culture is. And, he's just, because in the 3 episodes that we've now talked about, each episode has a very different kind of bent or flavor or lens, maybe is a better way of looking at it, through which they view the location where they are, which shows me a wide variety of things that he can be interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think you want to travel with him as a person who has a TV show to Iceland so that you can get in the insider tours.
Right? Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Ryan.
Yes.
Would you recommend this show?
I would. I would. It's enjoyable for sure. And there are some moments that are a little cheesy, but for the most part, I would say, yeah, I think it does a pretty good job. Again, I wouldn't watch it to plan my trip.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in travel and interested in sustainability or just learning more about a location different than what you might get just from, just a tourist trip to somewhere, I think it does a really good job with that. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed this show. It was about 40-minute long episodes.
Yep. Which I saw that and I was curious. I thought about you even before I watched it. I was like, oh, these are the longer ones. I wonder if Cheryl will like them. Will this follow her pattern?
Well, and yes and no, actually, because there were a couple scenes that seemed a little too random. And I think if it was strictly a 30-minute show, they would have had to cut those. The ones that were like, oh, why did they make that choice to go there? Like, it seems like an odd coupling. Well, maybe they wouldn't have if they didn't have the luxury of whatever length it ends up being on Netflix.
Sure.
But it didn't bother me that they were 40-minute.
You weren't
episodes.
bored like you have been with some of the other ones.
No, I wasn't bored. Yeah.
That's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to do it for this week's episode. We would love it if you would follow us on social media. We are at Timwe Podcast. That's at TMWI for Take Me With You Podcast. We are on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
You can also email us at timwepodcast@gmail.com. Send us suggestions of guests that we should have on, topics we should cover, or tell us the last movie that you saw Zac Efron in.
Yeah, do that. That would be fun for sure. You can also call us and leave us a voicemail at 406-763-8699, also known as 406-POD-TIMWE. Please rate and review us on whatever you're using to listen to this. Share about this episode on social media and subscribe to make sure you do not miss any of our episodes.
As always, thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the use of her artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can listen to Erica's music wherever music is sold or streamed.
Cheryl, I think we only have one more week of watching travel shows. We only have one more travel show left to watch and review.
That's right.
Are you ready for it?
Well, we don't even know what it's going to be yet, so that's exciting.
I guess you'll just have to tune in next week, and hopefully by then, Cheryl and I will have it figured out.
Yeah, hopefully. Otherwise, you're just going to have some dead air. So,
But until then, remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above, and light little love. Oh, the world is out there waiting to explore, and all our troubles here wanting to be